Let me introduce Eric. Eric Brewer is joining us today. Eric Brewer is VP of Infrastructure at Google. He's also a professor at Berkeley and knows a whole lot about the topics that we're currently reviewing. And Sasha, I hope that you have questions for him about the discussion we had about the CDF. So Eric, welcome. I'm so glad to have you. We do have a set of questions for you, but would you like to introduce yourself and just start the conversation out for us?
Sure. Eric Brewer, I've been doing kind of distributed systems and security for a long time. And Google, probably best known for Kubernetes, at Berkeley, best known for early, basically early cloud computing, the use of clusters to build large scale services. I did a bunch of work in developing countries. It was very interesting as well, but quite different. Certainly, people would mention the CAP theorem, which came out of the work on distributed systems in the 90s. But it's been quite a journey. And then I kind of know Tracy through the OpenSSF, which I helped start actually before we had the big supply chain attacks. So that was prescient and good, although it started right before COVID, immediately got sidetracked by that, and then kind of reopened after attacks got more serious. So it was a interesting journey, but happy to be here and happy to answer any questions I can.
So, Eric, Sasha Wharton, who's on the call today, he spent the last year on the governing board of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And this is something that I've seen coming along, that our traditional CI/CD tools may not be the kind of tools that are going to be around for much longer. Much has changed in platform engineering. So you notice that the first questions that we had really are all about infrastructure management and platform engineering and DevOps. Could you help us understand what you're seeing in terms of traditional continuous delivery CI/CD tools? Are they morphing into platform engineering? Are they moving into security? And what will the future look like for this particular industry?
Certainly, I think mid-sized and large-sized companies are moving to platforms more than ever, including for CI/CD, and it does, in fact, include security, if not driven by security. One way to think about it is, I really don't want, for at least important software, developers kind of developing stuff on their laptop and pushing it to production, which sounds great on the surface, and I've done it before, and it's efficient, but it's very easy to get wrong. It's also very easy to be the subject of an attack. And so it's not that I'm opposed to having a fast compile edit debug cycle on your laptop. I'm in favor of that. But when you decide to push it to production, I wanted to go through some extra, through an actual controlled build, through a build service that can sign it and generate provenance that we can trust, and run all kinds of other checks, including not only optimizations, but things like maybe you want to run race detection, if you want to look for SQL injections. There's so many things you can do when you're ready to put it in production. So I kind of feel like I want to separate the process of developing software from the process of saying, okay, this is ready to go. Let's build it for real, deploy it for real, test it for real.
So let me clarify what Google is doing. I've been in this business for quite some time, and in the beginning, we always took the code from the developers before we released it to production, and we built it ourselves using our own makefiles.
That is basically what we're doing, except that 5 years ago, even Google had at least 30 ways to do that, because many teams had their own version of that. And some of them were just slightly better than laptop jobs running the modern equivalent of makefiles. But when I say build service, I really mean it's a service maintained by a team that's highly available, and that we know its provenance and why we trust it. And I really don't want 30 of those. I want a few of those. If you need a special one for Android or for Android firmware, that's fine. Right, but that's rare. Most things should use one or two main build systems. And if you can't use those, then you need to change in some sense, not the systems. You don't get to have your own build system anymore, is kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah, that's what our Open Make Meister product did. It allowed you to make it easy for developers to have their build environment, but the same system to use it for the production side of the house. I am just pleasantly surprised to hear that that model is still welcome today, because there was a period of time that the CI/CD pipeline pretty much took the build over and did the deployment, or at least pushed it into a repo where the binaries were deployed and a production build was not done. So when I hear that, it feels to me like do you have a workflow then on your side, like a Jenkins workflow that does that build? How do you orchestrate that side?
It's, the famous ones are visible as Bazel, which is kind of, hermetic rule-based build. And Blaze is the internal Google project that does that. And then there's something that's more like Cloud Build, which is basically just managed workers that do build steps and have a workflow. So they're both variations of workflow, but we separate the CI and the CD. So in my mind, CI is getting something to what we would outside Google call a Docker container. It's actually not a Docker container internally. And then CD, which we actually do a little bit less of because we really want to control deployment, but it is automated, is really from those artifacts into production. So that middle step of storing the artifacts is super important to us. And in fact, we run lots of checks on those artifacts, including making them unavailable when we discover latent problems. There's a lot of advantages to having a very controlled repository of those artifacts.
So would you say then that the infrastructure side of the house does more security checks than the developer side, or just different?
I would say more and more thorough. Right? The developer side is not, there's different parts of it, but I would kind of feel like AI is going to make this even worse. But in general, I want developers to have guardrails so they kind of can't do the wrong thing. And that's enforced by the infrastructure, not by the tools that are under the developer's control, which I would argue can't actually enforce those things.
Right. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah. So, I totally agree with what you're talking about, having um fewer ways that having more control, a couple methods to control the CI process and the CD process. So why haven't tools like GitHub Actions and GitLab um, have these predefined workflows that are secure out of the box? I mean, every single shop I go into, I have to go and stand up all my GitLab workflows
Right.
and re-implement them. I just don't. It just seems like there's a big lack of, because there's only so many tools out there. There's only so many compilers. And you could take the top five and deliver something to everybody. So we were actually creating a secure world to start with out of the box. Does that make sense? My question?
It does make sense. I think the thing that hinders it primarily is that space is so fragmented. There's lots of, we've already mentioned like at least three or four just in this conversation, Jenkins being an example, GitHub, GitLab, Artifactory. There's lots of tools in this space that don't work all that well together. So it's kind of like you bring a bunch of point tools, but to do security, you need to actually an end-to-end story. Then every company has to build the end-to-end story themselves today,
You're
which
right.
is fine if you're Google, but it's a kind of a problem if you're not. Right? Like
Yeah.
even
And do you
Google's cloud
think,
offerings, we thought we could offer an end-to-end story, and so far the demand is not there. Right now, customers still want or think they want control of the individual pieces and that they'll do the assembly themselves. But I think they're making a giant mistake because they're actually not effectively putting in the security guardrails today.
so do you think AI is going to change that on how AI is going to, like AI agents and MCP servers are going to be plumbing together the different pieces?
The way, yes, although there's a lot of caveats in that sentence. So
Yeah. Of course.
It's going to
It's
increase
so
for
early
two
on.
reasons. One is increase because it's going to be more productive. But the other reason it's going to increase is if if we're worried about trusting a developer's laptop or what malware it has on it now, that's nothing compared to trusting arbitrary code generated by an agent that we're then going to put somewhere. So you need the guardrails even more if you don't really know what your development process is going to be.
I was thinking more of it from an orchestration perspective, do my Docker build and then go and push the artifact Sonatype, for example.
Yeah,
Where I can plug and play if I want to swap out Sonatype for JFrog, that type of thing. Or I have multiple teams wanting to use different artifact repositories. That's what I was kind of thinking of.
It's a good goal. It's not that easy, but I think it's a goal that this community could help with. So it's kind of 2 points I want to make. The first point is to build an end-to-end system in the kind of componentized way you said, you kind of need a little bit of agreement on some basic things, like what is the structure of provenance? Like how do you represent that this is an SBOM? Like even SBOM is not a well-defined thing at the moment, sadly, right? Or even simple things like what is your format of a timestamp or a signature? If you're signing something or testing to it, you need to agree on those formats across all the tools and all the systems, ideally. Right. In fact, and the second point is they go well together because I don't want agents generating attestations. I want tools generating attestations. And I want your agents using tools more than making bigger prompts. Right? If you're making bigger prompts to produce your code, you're doing it wrong. I want you to take your tools and make them more powerful because tools don't hallucinate. Tools can generate steps that have attestations that are signed that make sense. And if you construct your workflow out of those kinds of tools, I think the path you're talking about could work very well.
Got it. So
those two things have to go hand in hand. What's your kind of data model and how do you basically superpower your tools versus your agents?
So leverage the capability of the tools and then let them do all the, for lack of a better word, heavy lifting, and then have the agents kind of do more of the coordination level.
Agents are going to be great at orchestration. They can't be our source of attestation.
Right. Totally agree. Thanks.
What a great quote.
It is a good quote. I should write that down.
You should write that down. That's a really good quote. Well, these are that we've been having many of these discussions, and where in the pipeline Ortelius would be, and we used to be looking at shifting left and pulling the information early, but the more that we talk to end users, we realize that we probably are more of a platform engineering solution, and to be able to straddle those two environments so that we can track the endpoints of where a package is actually running has somewhat been a challenge for us.
Platform capability, really.
Yes, yeah, it's a platform engineering. So, and what we ended up what we're at right now, at least in cloud native environments, and I'm just going to throw this out to you while we have you. We are looking at using basically the audit logs, the Kubernetes audit logs, to find the endpoints.
Makes sense.
Okay, good. I'm glad that you had that response. We have had this discussion in many ways. Utkarsh, when we had those discussions, was there anything that was, I know we initially were worried about having endpoints stored in secrets. In the way that we're doing it now, did you and Steve come to like an understanding, and is there any clarifications we might get from Eric?
I think we still have to try that out. We have like a couple of assumptions. But yeah, it would be good to see how it comes up when we play around.
I think there's a few cases to worry about. In general, it's not clear to me that data is particularly reliable in the face of adversaries, meaning that I believe I could generate arbitrary logs and you would take them and not know that they're not real. That might be good if what you're using is detection of problems, but if you're trying to use it for prevention of problems, 100%, you may need to figure out how to make those logs reliable under the presence of an adversary.
So we
Which I
might want
don't
to
think
be
is
able to.
impossible, but it probably doesn't work out of the box.
So it's a good place to start, but we might need to figure out a way to secure the logs that we read.
For
So
example,
we have an
inside
audit
of
of that.
Google, we actually have Kubernetes logs. We have a separate logging system for GKE that does things like audit logs, and those logs are tamper-proof. So we can use those logs for compliance in a way that we can't use the normal Kubernetes logs for compliance.
And that's the current implementation that we're testing out, is using the GKE audit logs.
Those are, I think, safe to use from a security standpoint. We're definitely using them already for that. I don't see why you couldn't. But you have much less control over what's in those.
Yeah, the basic pieces that we need is when Kubernetes spins up a pod, what's the image that it's using and the
Sure.
shot of the image, and that's basically all we need to know.
Yeah, that's definitely in there.
Yeah.
So we only have 10 minutes left, and there were some other questions outside of the technology world that the team wanted to ask you.
Sure.
One was about mentorship. We try to do as much as we can around mentoring each other, and this year we did a job seekers series. We've done education. We'll have more education later this morning. In terms of mentorship at Google, what does that look like? And do you find it to be important for new technologists?
I think it is important. I do a lot of mentoring, actually. I do mentoring of a particular kind because I think it's underserved, which is basically kind of the transition to principal engineer, by which I mean going from leading a project technically to dealing with inter-org politics and indirect influence, and how you get other teams to work with you effectively. Right? That's a totally different skill set, and you don't get that in school, and you don't get it working as a TL normally, kind of in the middle of the stack. And so great TLs have trouble making the transition to kind of cross-org technical leaders exactly because of these soft skill issues. So that's one area that I focus on for mentoring. We have lots of processes for kind of technical learning, but they're more learning rather than mentoring, I would say.
And who should you go if you're looking for a mentor at your company? Who do you look for? How do people come to you? I would understand if I was at Google, I would probably come to you. But in general, how do you select a mentor?
I think you want someone. I mean, you have to have a certain rapport for sure. I think it's best if they're not in your org, or at least maybe close, but not in it, and certainly not in your management chain. It's also best if you can name the skill that they have that you want to learn. Right? It's easier to pick up a skill than to say gentle mentoring is good, because some people aren't that good as mentors, but they probably could still talk about that skill.
That's an interesting one. I don't think we've heard that suggestion before. Name the skill that you want to have. Yes, that's a really great suggestion, actually. In other words, if you want to be in that, it's kind of like when I chose my person who I take horseback riding lessons from. I saw her ride and I was like, I want to ride like that. So I decided to take lessons from her. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm usually working with about half a dozen people as mentees. It varies over time, and there's some rotation in and out, and various reasons. But these things have a natural lifetime. But I do enjoy it, and I do think it's can be very effective. At this point, I'm often, frankly, either mentoring superstars like a Kelsey Hightower, or people that have some potential but have some problems they need to overcome.
So if you were mentoring our little green alien Ortelius to do more work with the Open SSF, what would you suggest?
Well, let's start with what are your relative strengths, and do both sides agree with those relative strengths? That's partially knowing yourself and partially an education process, right? Because I think if you want a good partnership, you have to value each other, and that has to be real. And it doesn't usually start out real, or at least not real and equal. It doesn't even need to be equal, but it needs to be at least sincere and mutual. So I would say kind of like, why are you good partners, and in what areas? And kind of stick to those areas. I think it's often easy to get distracted by something like agents and say, oh, we'll be agent partners along with many other groups in 2026. But unless that you have something uniquely important to bring to that with OpenSSF as a partner, for example, I don't think it's worth the distraction. So you may change what you're doing slightly based on 2026 hot topics, but if you're making big changes, it's probably a shiny object problem.
Well, really not. We started this project before the OpenSSF was around.
Yeah.
So we were in the CDF, and we were kind of an odd bird in the CDF because we were wanting to manage. Basically, we were more of a platform engineering tool than a CI/CD tool, as we pointed out, because we're tracking production pieces. So we've never really known where we should really fit. Should we be in the CDF? Should we be in the OpenSSF? Because we are primarily a post-deployment vulnerability detection and now remediation solution that we want to push back through the CD pipeline. For me, it's hard to separate the two.
It is hard to separate the two, and it's hard to know when it matters. But I think you can kind of internally look and decide what are you getting out of the organization that you're in, and is it the right things? And maybe they can change, maybe you can change, and if it's not the right fit, you can change. Organization. It's not easy to do, not usually worth it, frankly, especially if there aren't that many base foundations, Eclipse, Apache, Linux Foundation. Those are kind of your players.
I would think we would stay in the Linux Foundation. I don't think we would jump.
But
yeah,
again, that means there's less upside to moving and less downside, because many of the things will be the same.
I honestly think that the CDF should just go over and be consumed by the OpenSSF, because eventually there's so many, without some orchestration, all the open source tools that are being created by the OpenSSF, you can't use them.
No, usage is still a problem in general. Yes.
Yeah. So what's our last question for you? Is what is pineapples on pizza okay?
It is for me, yes. I will say I'm pretty flexible. There are some things I've had in Japan on pizza, like mayonnaise, that I'm not that fond of. That's a common Japanese pizza ingredient.
Weird. Mayonnaise on pizza?
It's true, and it's popular, but so that one I had some problems with, but I can live with pineapple. Pineapple's pretty good.
Me too. It's one of my favorite things, as well as Sasha's. And it's always an argument if somebody sees pineapple on pizza. Either they love it or they absolutely hate it. There's no in between.
It is.
Now, what do you pair your pineapple with? Like Canadian bacon or
that is certainly
Italian sausage?
I prefer sausage over Canadian bacon for that, and not too spicy. I think if it's too spicy, it doesn't work as well with the pineapple. But I think that's definitely arguable.
Eric, we are at the bottom of the hour, and I know you're a busy man. I want to thank you so much for taking 30 minutes and talking to this team. There are so many areas that we're covering from, as you saw, we're working on an MCP server. We're trying to solve finding a vulnerable package running on an endpoint. Ortelius recently, we are going to probably be used by the Space Domain Awareness Lab to start tracking vulnerabilities across tooling there. So nice. recently, Deploy Hub recently got brought into the SDA TAPS lab, and we'll probably be using Ortelius to do that. So the AI part of what we're doing and the remediation is going to become more and more important. So thank you for bringing your thoughts and helping us out on this journey.